Hey now, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and it is time for another sinful episode of Q&A. You ask me questions, I give you answers, I try my absolute best not to offend you, and we all leave with our dignity intact, hopefully. Thank you so much for your questions. We got some really great ones last week. I read them all, I keep them all, can't get to them all right away, but trust me, I will get to them at some point. So keep them coming. You can email me directly at boardgamebrawl@gmail.com. You can write down in the YouTube comments. You can go to Facebook, facebook.com/boardgamebrawl, or Twitter at boardgamebrawl, and let me know what you think. Give me your opinion, give me your questions, anything you want to write, anything you want to ask, board game related or not, I am up for it. So, some quick news. Well, first off, if you can, go over to Patreon and try to patronize us, which sounds really funny. There's some, for different pledge levels, you might actually be able to take part in Google Hangouts and Google Live Play Sessions, which I'm still in the planning stages of, but I'm going to send out a message about that probably late tonight to people that are patrons. There's also, I'm going to try to do more patrons-only comment sections on there as well. So go and check it out. Whatever little bit you can give would be greatly appreciated and goes directly towards helping me improve my channel. I know it needs a lot of work. Month by month, I hope I'm incrementally getting better with it. I should have some big news about improving the quality of the channel soon, but I still need your help. So thank you so much. And if you can't pledge, you can't pledge. I don't want to make anyone feel guilty about that. Just the fact that you're viewing all of my videos really gives me a warm feeling in the cockles of my heart. So thank you so much. And other little bits of news. I'm considering taking part in Matt Leacock's pandemic parties the 6th and the 7th. If you haven't heard about this, Matt Leacock, the designer of Pandemic from Z-Man Games, wants to bring awareness to the fight for Ebola around the world through Doctors Without Borders by trying to raise funds through that organization by holding these pandemic parties the 6th and the 7th. You get a group of people together, play the game Pandemic, and raise awareness for the issue. And I'm considering doing a live play session for this on December 7th at night, or maybe in the day sometime. But because I've just recently, by coincidence, gotten quite a bit back into Pandemic, I pulled it off the shelf and played it for the first time in a long time. Finally got around to reviewing it in the On the Brink expansion, and then I got Pandemic the Cure, which is a lot of fun, and my review for that should be coming out today. So I think it would be cool to get some friends together, play Pandemic the Cure, and maybe a party game latched on to the beginning and end of that as well. Because I've wanted to do a live gameplay session again anyways, this seems like a good opportunity. So if you're interested in that, I'm probably going to make it happen some way or another, but I want to know what you think. I want to know other things you might want to see, or other ways I could do it, any kind of feedback you could give. If you don't want to see it at all, let me know. I just want to know your thoughts on that. And finally, before we get to the questions for today, we have a new contest. I did not expect to have one so soon, but a very, very generous viewer decided to donate this item together with the shipping cost, and I really, really appreciate it. That person wants to remain anonymous, but thank you so much, and we all, and everyone who's going to be potentially entering the contest, thanks you as well, I'm sure. And that item is the Avengers vs. X-Men Dice, it's hard to say this name, Dice Masters Avengers vs. X-Men starter set from WizKids. Slightly used copy, it just didn't work out for this person's group, but this is pretty hard to get right now. It's very easy to get the Uncanny X-Men starter set, the new set that came out, and the booster packs for that, but not so much Avengers vs. X-Men. That is still out of print and out of stock at most major retail outlets. You can get it on places like eBay, but for a much more inflated cost than what it's supposed to be. So this is your chance to easily get a copy just by entering this contest. And I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible, but I want to make you work just a tiny smidge for it. So email me, boardgamebrawl@gmail.com, and put in the subject line, Dice Masters Contest. That's it, 3 words, Dice Masters Contest. And then in the description, I want you to tell me who your favorite superhero or supervillain is from any universe. Doesn't have to be the Marvel Universe. Could be Image Comics, DC Comics, Indie Comics, whatever you want. Tell me who your favorite character is, and write that in the subject line, and you, Dice Masters Contest in the subject line, and you will have a shot at winning the contest. And for international contest entrants, our generous donor is covering part of the shipping cost, but for international, if you win internationally, I'm going to cover the first 12, and then the rest is going to be up to you. So know that going into it. I'd like to make their shipping donation last for multiple contests if I can. So just go ahead and keep that in mind before you enter. And I'll announce the winner next week. So send in your entries, boardgamebrawl@gmail.com. I look forward to seeing all of your responses for the superheroic or supervillainous characters. Now, without further ado, let's get to today's questions with a magical, painful dissolve. Ow! See, I told you, those dissolves really hurt. Anyways, Nicholas Wozniacki, who asked a really great question a few weeks ago that's kind of escaping my mind, but I remember his name, wants to know a very simple question. What do I do for a living? And I have touched on this very briefly in some videos, but it's few and far between, so I don't blame people for not remembering. But I work for a marketing agency down here in South Florida. I don't actually know that they want me to say my name, the name of it on my videos. I'm sure they'd like a free plug, but just in case, I won't say it. But I've actually worked in printing for the last, 17 years? I think since I was 16 or 17 years old, I've worked in the printing industry. I started off part-time while I was still in high school, and then it just became full-time. I just kind of fell into it and kept doing it for a long time. But for most of that time, I was on the production end, where I was actually just doing working back in like a warehouse area, either like doing that kind of warehouse duties or also running folders, running cutters, things that actually cut reams of paper. I mean, commercial printing. So brochures and postcards, things that you get in the mail, all of that types of stuff, catalogs and books. I ran a perfect binder for a while. I ran a stitching machine for a while. I probably used every major piece of printing equipment. I very briefly was helping out on large multicolor presses, like the kind that fill up an entire warehouse room. I've worked on mass scale Xerox printers doing form letters. I've done everything. And for the current job that I have in my marketing agency, it's I still do production work, but it's also more customer relations, sales. I go out to networking events. And we do more than just physical printing. So we do websites and we do apparel and promotional items. So I'm seeing more and more different aspects of it rather than just physical, here's my business card printing. We do that though too. So it's pretty interesting. It's not necessarily what I would have chosen for myself to do 20 years ago for sure. It just kind of happened that way, and we'll see where it takes me. But I would say this is probably, of all the places I've worked at within the field of printing, this is the best place that I've worked at. And I feel that there's more opportunities for me to expand here, if any at all. At the same time, it's interesting because when I hear and listen to podcasts and commentary on Board Game Geek about people talking about the production process for board games and how printing works, and the technical aspects of producing a physical board game, even though I've never actually done that, I know some of the terminology that they're using and how tough it can be, even like how difficult it can be to make a box. I think these are sometimes board gamers take that stuff for granted, but it is very difficult. And I can only imagine how difficult it is to manufacture like wooden pieces on a mass scale or plastic miniatures. So, because I know how difficult it can be just to get a rule book right. Those kind of catalogs and books are something that I've done for years, and I know how difficult that process is. And to get, thousands and thousands of them to come out perfectly is a really, really difficult thing. So whenever someone says, I've heard people say like, "Oh, it's just a rule book. Why can't they get this right?" And I don't mean the text in the rule book. I mean how it's cut, how it looks. It's harder than you think. So I have some sympathy for companies, not just the company that publishes the game, but the production company they use. I have some sympathies for them in that regard. So it's given me a different perspective to look at it with. So in that regard, I think my job really helps me there. And I've always imagined that if I actually run a Kickstarter at some point, I will use my company to produce like t-shirts and cool promo stuff to hand out. So who knows, maybe someday in the future that will happen. But thanks, Nick, for the question. I really appreciate it. And now you know what I do. Francisco Santana wants to follow up with the video game related question I was asked last week. I believe I was asked, do I like video games? Do I still play them? And I talked about how they're basically just gathering dust on my shelf. But he wanted to know, can you get a hardcore video gamer into board games? What kind of games should you try to play with them that's going to appeal to them the most? And I wish I could give you like a catch-all answer. I don't think there is one because, just like there are so many different types and genres of board games that people gravitate towards, Ameritrash, heavy Euro games, party games, small card games, these types, abstract games, these types of things, the video game business has become so big that has fragmented as well. And I think that whereas it used to be, if you were a video gamer, I'm talking about back when I was a kid, and you just played whatever. You played any video game you can get your hands on. Sometimes you might not like sports games, but like I didn't. But other than that, you played everything. Nowadays, there are people who will only play games that are like first-person shooters, like Call of Duty, or will only play or any kind of game that involves multiplayer and online multiplayer. Some people will only play RPGs or, sort of kitschy Japanese games. That's the same kind of fragmentation that we have in board game genres as well. So what you need to do is figure out the games that these people like the most, video games, and then try to find something that's going to give them some of that same feeling on the tabletop. So I think, for instance, if it's someone who really likes RPGs, video game RPGs like Final Fantasy series or whatever, there's hundreds and thousands of them at this point, then go for something like Descent, or go for something like Super Dungeon Explorer, which, I would say it's less of an RPG, but more of it, although the new set coming out is more like an RPG, I guess, but it gives you that same fantasy feeling of running around, hacking and slashing things. Especially, I think, like Super Dungeon Explorer would appeal to, say, a World of Warcraft player, for instance. But essentially, in an RPG, it's got more of a cooperative feel to it. So any kind of fantasy-themed cooperative game will really work in that regard. Anything where you're teaming up with people and working together. People that like the Left 4 Dead series, for instance, might like games like Zombicide. I mean, that's a natural transition. So find out the themes and the type of gameplay that they like, and try to find a game that translates that over well. If someone plays games like Call of Duty, it's difficult to get the first-person feel in a board game, but as far as being like uber competitive, I think that's what you want to go for. So head-to-head strategic games really work well for that. Remember that there are board games that are actually based off of video games. There is a Doom board game. It's kind of hard to find, but you can. Gears of War board game. There's a BioShock Infinite, The Siege of Columbia. These things are out there, but remember that another thing is that even though your friends who play video games might be like the smartest people ever and are fantastic at video games, that doesn't necessarily translate into them being able to understand board games well. It's such a different thing. Some of the smartest people I know have sat down to play a game that I thought was just like a midway game, and it's very, very difficult to wrap their head around the concepts. Try explaining the deck building concept to someone. Like, I'm talking about deck building, like a deck building game like Dominion. Try explaining that to someone for the very first time. It is very, very odd and kind of charming in a way. It's so weird to see them try to wrap their head around that concept. So keep that in mind, that just like you're trying to teach anyone, even like a casual person to gaming, video gamers might have the same kind of issues, but appeal to what themes appeal to them, the type of action that they like, whether they prefer cooperative or really like bloodthirsty competitive games. I think the card games work really well in this regard. I think it's a natural transition to have people play games like Magic the Gathering who are also into video games, and just, see what appeals to them. It's going to take some trial and error, and be prepared that people are not going to be ready to make that transition. Not every person that likes one aspect of geeky culture is going to like another, but there is enough overlap there that I think you can get people into it, so long as you can get the right theme, because remember that for video games, it's much more immersive. There's much more going on the screen, bright and colorful graphics, so a game that looks good and that really drags you into it is going to go over much, much better. So really interesting question, Francisco. I hope I did it justice. Thank you very much. And finally, Robbie Dorman, who is actually a member of my group, has a really interesting question. How important is the balance between theme and mechanics? Does the theme have to tie in with the mechanics for it to be a good game? And this is interesting to me because recently this came up on one of Vassal's reviews for a Stefan Feld game, and I kind of got into the discussion a bit, because he was slamming the fact that the game didn't have any theme to it. And some people were like, it's still a good game. Who cares if it doesn't have theme? You have to use your imagination. If a game is good, a game is good. There are some games, including Stefan Feld games, that I like quite a bit, that are really themeless. And I think that an argument can be made that one of my favorite games, perhaps my favorite game, you'll know that soon when I start doing my top 100, is Seasons, and Seasons does not have a strong theme. It looks gorgeous. You have these awesome chunky dice, and there's beautiful artwork on all the cards, but I never feel like I'm a powerful wizard in a summoning competition. I just don't. So, but I still love the game. So a game is a game, and it's going to be either good or bad regardless of the theme. And I've seen some games with fantastic themes just this weekend that were horrible as far as the gameplay goes. But a game that manages to have good mechanics, or let's just say average mechanics, but a fantastic theme, for me, is going to be elevated to a better place. And there are some games that can mix the two of them together and have each aspect feed off of each other in a way that almost seems seamless. And those are the games that I really, really love. Dead of Winter, Robinson Crusoe. I mean, these games, everything that you do just feels thematic, intense, and stressful, but in all the right kinds of ways. And there are other lighter games that give me that same kind of feeling as well. Even a game like Legendary, even though it's basically just going through cards, you still can feel sort of overwhelmed. You're trying to take out these villains, and you're working together. Those little bits of theme help push forward what would otherwise be a pretty abstract deck building experience. So actually, someone said it best in the video I was referencing earlier in the comment section, saying that a great theme is sort of like the scaffolding that holds up a game. It's just there, and sometimes it doesn't have to be ever present, but it really enhances a game and makes it better and makes it easier to work through a game. So I think that's where I'm coming at it from. A game can be, and this is also ties together with artwork and components too, which sometimes people kind of overlook in this discussion. But let's take, for example, Shadows over Camelot. Shadows over Camelot, even though the idea of the theme is great, you're knights in Camelot trying to fend off the evil forces of Mordred, you're making poker hands with your cards, which is totally unthematic. But the game looks beautiful. It has you do these little extra ancillary things, like how you say what you have in your hand, and doing the ceremonial putting cards on the round table and dispensing them amongst each other. So the theme comes out because of those reasons and really helps push it above what is otherwise just kind of mediocre mechanics, and it turns it into something else, turns it into a better game. I think you're going to see more and more of that. I think that people are starting to realize, even heavy Euro gamers are starting to realize, that you need to have a little something else to make your game stick out and to get people to be interested and involved, invested in the outcome of the game. You see games like City of Iron, which is a really heavy Euro game, but it's got a really cool theme, and you're doing cool thematic stuff like sending airships out to attack other neighboring countries, and getting all these different people into your deck and using their abilities. I mean, it just feels really, really cool. So you're going to see more of that. I've talked before about these hybrid Euro Ameritrash games that recognize that a good game can go together with a good theme. They don't have to be separate. You can make them work together and do it in such a way that you're not alienating either audience. But just to sum it up, I think a theme is very important to a game for me. But again, one cannot really they have to coexist. You can't have one without the other. You can't have a terrible game and a great theme. It just won't work. It is necessary to have them sort of living harmoniously together. That's my opinion anyways. There's always exceptions to the rule, but I think that this debate is just going to rage on and on and on. Ultimately, it's up to you whether or not you can have fun with a dry game or whether you can have fun with a very thematic game that is not much of a game at all. Different strokes for different folks. Well, thank you so much for watching. Keep your questions coming. Make sure to enter our contest, boardgamebrawl@gmail.com, Dice Masters contest in the subject line. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.